when did you hear it? Who told you? When did you hear that had happened?
I was at home and I got a phone call. It was early in the morning. I was in the country and I just got a phone call. And it was like...
Paul McCartney is not one to shed a tear in public very often. But there's one song that hit him so hard, he couldn't hold back the tears. It's not one of his biggest hits, or a song you hear every day, but it carries a deep meaning for him. It's about someone he once shared everything with: fame, music, friendship. Join us as we take a closer look at the song that opened up Paul's heart, the special bond behind it, and the heartbreaking moment that changed everything for him and for music fans around the world. The song Here Today. Paul McCartney's music Here Today, which debuted in 1982 on his album Tug of War, is far more than just another entry in his extensive discography. It distinguishes itself as a tender, personal monologue, one of the most heartfelt pieces Paul has ever presented to the public. Composed in the wake of John Lennon's tragic death in 1980, the song serves as an unresolved dialogue, a love letter, and a confession, all rolled into one. It wasn't crafted for radio play or public acclaim. It was created out of necessity. In contrast to the grand orchestrations of some of Paul's most popular songs, Here Today is reduced to its emotional essence. Its simplicity is its power. Just Paul, his voice, and a string quartet. That's all he required to express what had remained unspoken for so long. Paul started composing Here Today shortly after Lennon passed away. Their relationship was notoriously complex, marked by the creative peaks of the Beatles and the harsh public split that followed the band's dissolution. However, underneath the friction was a profound connection. In various interviews, Paul has expressed that he was devastated not only by the death of his friend, but also by the void that existed between them in their final days. The song served as a means to bridge that gap, to express the sentiments he never had the opportunity to convey. Paul McCartney later disclosed that he shed tears while composing it. The emotion was not for show, it was genuine and profound. He expressed how he was somewhat emotional when I penned it, saying it was incredibly touching to create it. This was not a track intended for the charts. It served as a personal outlet, stemming from a blend of guilt, sorrow, and yearning. The song is described as resembling a one-sided conversation. The initial lines draw the listener into a fictional moment shared between Paul McCartney and Lennon, which came off in form of a question asking that if he said he really knew John well, what would his answer be? It seems as if Paul McCartney is positioned across from Lennon, uncertain about how to initiate the dialogue, yet feeling compelled to speak. There is a sense of hesitation, second-guessing, and even humor, which played a significant role in their friendship. At one moment, he envisions Lennon chuckling at his effort to be sentimental, saying, "Well, knowing you, you'd probably laugh and say that we were worlds apart." This line serves a dual purpose. It encapsulates Lennon's well-known sarcastic demeanor, while also revealing Paul's vulnerability. He attempts to be open, yet he pictures John dismissing it with a joke. There is an absence of bitterness, with no references to their disputes or differences. Instead, there is only nostalgia, warmth, and the pain of what has been lost. Paul refrains from elaborating on details. He finds no need to. The emotional essence of their relationship is conveyed through this restraint. Musically, it was noted that Here Today revolves around a soft acoustic guitar and string arrangement. George Martin, who had been the Beatles' producer for many years, was responsible for the orchestration, which added a subtle dignity to the composition. The strings were described as not overpowering. Instead, they were said to float around Paul's voice like echoes of reminiscence. The production decisions were intentional. There were no drums, no harmonies, and no full band. It was characterized as sparse, reminiscent of a room left empty after someone had departed. Paul's vocal performance was also described as deeply personal. It was observed that he didn't so much sing the song as he did speak it. His voice was said to convey the delicacy of someone striving to maintain their composure, even as the burden of memory threatened to unravel him. The pauses and the subtle breaks in his voice were noted to enhance the song's emotional sincerity. Although it was never issued as a single, critics and fans alike quickly recognized Here Today as one of the most heartfelt tracks on Tug of War. The album received positive reviews overall, yet Here Today garnered particular acclaim for its heartfelt nature. In a career often characterized by catchy tunes and refined production, this song unveiled a more vulnerable, introspective, and open side of Paul. Some reviewers referred to it as the emotional heart of the album. Others likened it to a spiritual continuation of the song Yesterday, but with a more personal and immediate touch. Its strength lies not in its composition or melody, though both are superb, but in the emotional vulnerability it conveys. Paul removes his facade, allowing us to glimpse the individual behind the legend. Upon the release of Tug of War in 1982, it was noted that Here Today quietly emerged as one of the most praised tracks on the album, despite not being a single. Critics from both the UK and US music press reacted to the song not with commercial expectations, but rather with an acknowledgement of its emotional clarity and artistic maturity. Rolling Stone, in its review of the album, referred to Here Today as a stunning exercise in restraint, commending Paul for delivering a moment of personal reckoning with rare vulnerability. The magazine highlighted that, in contrast to some of his post-Beatles solo work, this track showcased a profound understanding of how simplicity can often carry more emotional weight than production-heavy compositions. In the Los Angeles Times, the song was characterized as unexpectedly touching, with critic Robert Hilburn stating that it reveals a side of Paul often lost in his public persona, the man who feels deeply but usually hides behind melody. He pointed out the conversational structure of the lyrics as a unique instance of Paul lowering his defenses, remarking, "This is not a song for the public, it's a song for one man, and yet it touches everyone." In the UK, The Guardian pointed out in its review that the song was referred to as the emotional nucleus of Tug of War. It mentioned that while the rest of the album showcased polished production and diverse musical styles, Here Today stood out as being pared down to its essence, the only track where the walls fall away. The review wrapped up by stating that the song deserves to be studied not just as a tribute, but as a masterclass in personal songwriting. Melody Maker, a well-known UK music magazine at the time, described it as the most honest piece of songwriting Paul has done since the Beatles. The reviewer noted the almost trembling quality of Paul's vocal performance and suggested that the emotional ambiguity, regret, warmth, distance was more powerful than any eulogy could be. Years later, when looking back at Paul's post-Beatles work, the song continued to receive acclaim. In a 2001 retrospective by Mojo magazine, Here Today was featured in a list of Paul McCartney's most essential solo songs, characterized as a quiet masterpiece born out of grief, guilt, and grace. The same article highlighted how the track had aged gracefully, gaining more significance as the decades went by and as Paul kept performing it in concerts. Even those critics who frequently criticized Paul's solo endeavors recognized the strength of the song. In a 2017 reassessment of Tug of War by Pitchfork, it was remarked that Here Toda transcends its moment, and it was characterized as possibly the most significant post-Beatles track Paul has ever composed. The review praised the song for its emotional complexity without excessive drama, and its quietly revolutionary nature in terms of openness. Over the years, it was noted that Here Today had taken on even greater significance. Initially intended as a personal message to a departed friend, it evolved into a staple of Paul's live shows, particularly following George Harrison's death in 2001. Each time he performed it, Paul appeared to reconnect with a segment of his history, and the audience could sense that authenticity. During his Back in the U.S. tour in 2002, he would introduce the song with a straightforward remark, saying this is a song he wrote for John. That single statement was frequently sufficient to create a silence among the audience. In that instant, tens of thousands of fans found common ground, not only through the music, but also through collective sorrow and shared memories. Paul would perform it solo, seated, occasionally showing visible emotion. There were no theatrics, just the song. He once expressed that performing it live allowed him to feel a connection to John once more. It was not merely a performance, it was a ritual, a tribute. One of the most heartfelt elements of Here Today lies in its foundation of unspoken words. Paul not only grieves for Lennon, but also for the silence that lingered between them at the time of John's passing. In one verse, he expresses saying he always thought that John were here today, for he is in his song. This line carries a sense of ambiguity. Paul is aware that John is no longer with him, yet through this song he envisions him as still present. The music transforms into a medium of spiritual connection, a means to bridge the chasm. This song resonates with anyone who has experienced loss accompanied by unvoiced sentiments. Thus, it transcends the relationship between Lennon and Paul. It speaks to all of us. It reflects the sorrow of conversations left unheard, the ache of incomplete stories, and the restorative essence of finally articulating those feelings, even if it is merely through song. Here Today may not rank among Paul's chart-topping hits, yet it is celebrated by musicians and fans alike as one of his most exceptional solo creations. Esteemed artists such as Dave Grohl, Norah Jones, and Eddie Vedder have lauded its intimate nature. Numerous renditions have emerged, typically featuring acoustic and subtle arrangements that honor its inherent simplicity. In the aftermath of Lennon's passing, a multitude of tribute songs have been composed. However, few have encapsulated the complexity of genuine friendship, quite like Here Today. It strikes a delicate balance between sentimentality and detachment, navigating the realms of grief and love with remarkable elegance. The song has also been featured in various documentaries and retrospectives, including The Love We Make and McCartney 321, where Paul reflects on the songwriting process and the emotional weight it carried. Each retelling serves as a heartfelt reminder that even legendary figures like Paul bear emotional wounds, and that music continues to be their truest form of expression. Throughout numerous interviews spanning decades, Paul has frequently highlighted Here Today as one of his most cherished songs. It's not celebrated for its technical prowess, but rather for its significance. He has described it as an emotional release, serving as a means of closure. He once recounted how he composed the song while sitting on the floor of his bedroom. There was no grand piano or professional studio, just him and his guitar. This detail is crucial. It reveals how deeply personal this song truly is. Paul mentioned sitting on the floor in the corner of his room with my guitar, just reflecting on John and crying, and the song came out in a rush. This authenticity is what renders Here Today timeless. It doesn't attempt to neatly package grief into structured verses. Instead, it simply opens the door and allows the emotions to flow in. This authenticity is what renders Here Today timeless. It doesn't attempt to neatly package grief into structured verses. Instead, it simply opens the door and allows the emotions to flow in. But who was John Lennon, and what beautiful friendship did he share with Paul? Who is John Lennon, and about their friendship? John Lennon stands as one of the most iconic, intricate, and frequently analyzed figures in the annals of music history. As a founding member of the Beatles, his impact transformed popular culture, music, and the very essence of what it meant to be a songwriter. Yet, beneath the legend lay a man who, like everyone else, was shaped not only by his public accomplishments, but also by his personal connections, none more significant than the bond he had with Paul McCartney. Born on October 90, 1940, in Liverpool, England, John Winston Lennon was primarily raised by his Aunt Mimi, after his mother Julia was considered unfit to provide full-time care. Nevertheless, Julia remained an influential presence in his formative years. She introduced him to rock and roll, taught him to play the banjo, and nurtured his artistic inclinations. Her untimely death in 1958, following a tragic accident, dealt a crushing blow to the teenage John, and would profoundly influence his emotional depth as a songwriter. John was never a model student. He was recognized for his sarcasm, humor, and rebellious nature. Even in his teenage years, he exhibited the creative defiance that would eventually establish him as a cultural icon. He had a passion for wordplay, constantly sketched, and immersed himself in music. All of these elements laid the groundwork for his future collaboration with someone who would provide harmony and structure to his chaotic creativity, Paul McCartney. The bond between John Lennon and Paul McCartney took root on July 6, 1957, during a church fete at St. Peter's in Woolton, Liverpool. At that time, Paul was just 15 years old and was introduced to 16-year-old John, who was showcasing his talents with his skiffle band, the Quarrymen. Paul made an immediate impression on John, not only with his skill in tuning a guitar and playing intricate chords, but also with his extensive musical knowledge and self-assurance. Shortly thereafter, John extended an invitation to Paul to join his band, marking a crucial moment for both musicians. In the ensuing years, they embarked on a songwriting journey that would shape the legacy of the Beatles and establish a benchmark for musical collaboration. From the outset, John and Paul crafted songs eyeball to eyeball, as Lennon famously put it. They exchanged notebooks, experimented with chords, and composed in various locations, be it buses, hotel rooms, or dressing rooms. Their chemistry was unmistakable. Despite their differing styles, these contrasts fostered a harmonious balance. Lennon's writing style was characterized by its rawness, bluntness, and emotional honesty. He infused his work with edge, humor, and a sense of existential dread. In contrast, Paul provided melodic structure, romantic themes, and an optimistic lyrical approach. The combination of their differing personalities resulted in an incredible body of work. Classics like I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, Eleanor Rigby, A Day in the Life, and Let It Be are just a few examples of their brilliance. Their friendship extended beyond mere music creation. They challenged one another, playfully teased each other, engaged in friendly competition, and learned from one another. For instance, when John introduced Strawberry Fields Forever, Paul countered with Penny Lane. Similarly, when Paul composed Hey Jude, John was supportive, even though it wasn't his original concept. Each song became a playful contest, driven by mutual respect and a shared creative vision. An important, yet frequently overlooked aspect of John and Paul's relationship was the shared trauma they experienced. Both faced the loss of their mothers at a young age. John's mother, Julia, passed away when he was 17, while Paul lost his mother, Mary, at 14. This common grief was rarely discussed openly, but it profoundly influenced their lives. Paul has often remarked that this shared trauma laid an emotional groundwork for their friendship fostering a silent understanding between them. They were also of similar age, experiencing the overwhelming effects of fame side by side. As the Beatles rose to global superstardom in the early 1960s, the connection between Lennon and Paul strengthened. They spent almost every day together, whether it was in the recording studios, touring in distant lands, or seeking refuge from their adoring fans. While fame distanced them from the outside world, it simultaneously drew them closer to one another. In numerous interviews, Paul has recounted the countless hours they shared, discussing everything from music to love, death, and the absurdities of fame. Paul once remarked that he was like a brother, and they shared so many adventures and laughter together. However, as the Beatles' fame escalated, so did the internal tensions. By 1968, the enchantment of their early collaboration began to unravel. Creative disagreements became more pronounced. John was becoming increasingly politically vocal and deeply engaged with Yoko Ono. Meanwhile, Paul, ever the perfectionist, grew more exasperated by what he perceived as a lack of discipline within the group. During the recording of the White Album, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Each band member started to focus on their own individual songs. The previously united group now resembled four solo performers. The collaborative writing relationship between Lennon and Paul, which had once been seamless and close, had effectively diverged into two distinct paths. The final straw was the conflict over business decisions affecting the band. John favored manager Alan Klein, while Paul preferred the Eastmans, his in-laws. This disagreement over management escalated into legal battles and public animosity. By 1970, the Beatles had officially disbanded, and the once unbreakable partnership of Lennon and Paul had come to an end. In the immediate aftermath of the breakup, the relationship between John and Paul took a significant downturn. Lennon composed and released a song titled "How Do You Sleep?", a biting song directed specifically at Paul. The lyrics accused Paul of being shallow, clinging to the past, and lacking direction. Paul, though hurt, responded with more nuanced criticisms in his own music. Their conflict unfolded in the media. Interviews were filled with sarcasm, hidden jabs, and a sense of disappointment. Fans chose their sides. Lennon appeared furious. Paul seemed on the defensive. The world grieved the disbandment of the Beatles, yet Paul often bore the brunt of the blame for its dissolution, something that weighed heavily on him for many years. However, beneath the surface of the headlines, the hostility began to diminish. With the passage of time, both men softened. They began to exchange letters and phone calls. The profound connection they once had been tested, but it was not entirely severed. In 1974, Paul and his wife Linda paid a visit to John at his apartment in the Dakota, New York. They spent the evening filled with laughter, conversation, and even a bit of jamming. While it wasn't a public reconciliation, it represented something far more significant: a private rekindling of their friendship. Paul would later reflect on that night as warm and cheerful. They didn't delve into discussions about the Beatles or past conflicts. They simply relished the joy of being two old friends once more. In the years that followed, there were additional phone calls, particularly after the arrival of Lennon's son, Sean. Their conversations touched on fatherhood, songwriting, and the possibility of collaborating again in the future. Although they never established any formal plans, the idea remained a possibility. Paul has mentioned that their final phone call was laid back. John was in the midst of baking bread. They shared laughter, and nothing too serious was discussed. It felt completely normal. Then, just a short while later, John was gone. On December 8, 1980, John Lennon was tragically shot and killed outside his residence in New York City. The news sent shockwaves around the globe. For Paul, it was utterly paralyzing. When reporters approached him for a statement the next day, he simply remarked, "It's a drag." This comment was often misinterpreted as insensitive. However, Paul later clarified that he was merely feeling overwhelmed and numb. What could he possibly articulate in that moment that would truly reflect their years of friendship? In private, Paul was devastated. He has since shared his profound grief, the regrets over unspoken words, and the sorrow of not having more time with John. One of the heaviest emotional weights he has borne is the realization that they never had that significant, heartfelt conversation that could have beautifully encapsulated their friendship. Yet, in a sense, Paul discovered another way to express those feelings through the song "Here Today." Despite the complexities of their relationship, it is undeniable that John Lennon and Paul McCartney shared a profound love for one another. Their bond was characterized by joy, competition, admiration, and occasionally bitterness, but it always retained its significance. Since John's passing, Paul has taken significant steps to honor his friend's legacy. He speaks of John with deep respect and warmth, often incorporating small tributes into his performances. When he sings "Here Today," he presents it as a conversation he never got to have. Additionally, he has kept John's spirit alive through interviews, documentaries, and even in subtle gestures, such as wearing pins, alluding to their cherished inside jokes, and recognizing how Lennon continues to motivate him. The collaboration between Lennon and McCartney transcended mere music creation. It was about maturing together amidst extraordinary challenges. It was the story of two boys from Liverpool who not only transformed the world, but also profoundly influenced each other. The death of John comes with so many questions. Who could have wanted him dead? And why? But there is only much that can be answered. Let's find out. The circumstances that lead to John's death. The assassination of John Lennon was not merely unexpected, it was beyond comprehension. After years of living a quieter life, John had made a triumphant return to music with his album Double Fantasy, a collaboration with Yoko Ono. This project signified a revival of his creative spirit. For the first time in a long while, he appeared to be truly content. Balancing his time between writing songs, being a father, and even baking bread in their New York apartment. Then, in an instant, everything changed. On the evening of December 8th, John and Yoko had spent the day at the record plant studio, putting the finishing touches on a new track. Earlier that same day, outside the Dakota, where they lived on Manhattan's Upper West Side, John had taken a moment to sign an autograph for a fan who was waiting with a copy of Double Fantasy. That fan was Mark David Chapman, who had traveled from Hawaii with a singular, deadly intention: to kill John Lennon. Around 10:50 p.m., after returning from the studio, John exited the car and made his way toward the building. Nearby, Chapman stood quietly, gripping a .38 caliber revolver. Without any forewarning, he fired 5 shots, 4 of which struck John in the back and shoulder. John staggered a few steps into the entrance of the Dakota before collapsing. He was quickly transported to Roosevelt Hospital, but it was too late. He was declared dead upon arrival at 11:15 p.m. Chapman did not run away. Instead, he calmly pulled out the catcher in the rye, sat down on the sidewalk, and started reading. When the police arrived, he stated that he acted alone and did not resist. In subsequent interviews, he asserted that he felt driven to kill John because he viewed the musician as a phony who preached peace while enjoying a life of luxury. Chapman's warped reasoning, driven by delusion, religious confusion, and obsession, transformed him into one of the most despised criminals of the 20th century. The news of John's death was a monumental event. In the hours that followed, fans flocked to the streets outside the Dakota, lighting candles and openly weeping. Around the globe, people came together in disbelief. Radio stations played Beatles songs on a loop. News anchors, many of whom had grown up listening to the Beatles, struggled to maintain their composure as they delivered the heartbreaking news. For Paul McCartney, the loss was devastating. However, true to McCartney's nature, his initial public reaction was subdued, an instinctive retreat into solitude, which was widely criticized as being callous. But Paul later clarified that he was emotionally overwhelmed, uncertain of what to express, and did not want to break down in front of strangers. In private, he grieved profoundly. The knowledge that their final years had been dedicated to mending their friendship, rather than performing together, provided some solace. However, the abruptness of John's passing left little opportunity for closure. There was no last embrace, no farewell dialogue, and no final song. In later years, Paul has expressed a wish that he had told John more frequently how much he cared for him. That sense of regret has persisted, influencing the heartfelt tributes Paul has shared over the decades. In the years that ensued, the death of John Lennon evolved into a legend of its own. Chapman received a sentence of 20 years to life and remains incarcerated to this day, having been denied parole on multiple occasions. His name is rarely mentioned by fans. Many choose not to glorify the individual who silenced a voice of a generation. John Lennon's assassination also marked a crucial moment in how celebrities, especially musicians, considered their safety. At that time, Lennon lived without the protection of bodyguards. He roamed the streets of New York freely, often pausing to sign autographs or take pictures. His willingness to engage was part of his allure, but it also rendered him susceptible. Following his death, other public figures began to reassess how accessible they could afford to be. The cultural impact was profound. Lennon was not merely viewed as a musician, he was regarded as a thinker, a man who leveraged his influence to question the norm, promote peace, and navigate the peculiar contradictions of celebrity. His passing was grieved not only by Beatles enthusiasts, but also by activists, artists, and visionaries who felt they had lost a voice that resonated with their experiences. For Paul McCartney, the reverberations of that fateful night have lingered throughout his life and career. He has paid tribute to John in both subtle and overt manners, through interviews, during concerts, and most touchingly, in his music. Songs like Here Today provided him with a personal outlet to express what remained unspoken, while live performances frequently feature homages to John, whether through anecdotes, dedications, or lyrics integrated into fresh arrangements. These tributes aren't just performances, they're acts of remembrance. For Paul, each note carries a weight, a memory, a silent conversation between past and present. Audiences may sing along, but he's often singing to John. And in those quiet moments on stage, surrounded by thousands, Paul is still that Liverpool boy, longing to reconnect with the friend who helped shape his soul. John's absence casts a long shadow over Paul's narrative, a heartfelt reminder of both what existed and what might have been. In various interviews, Paul has shared that he often dreams of John. In some dreams, they are collaborating on songs, just as they did in the past. In others, they are simply conversing. And occasionally, these dreams conclude with him awakening in tears. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.